beneath Arizona's unforgiving sun in the late 1870s, Martha Keene, a widow scarred by loss, guards her crumbling ranch with a heart sealed shut. A stranger's knock and a child's hopeful eyes stir embers of a life she thought buried. What begins as a fleeting encounter unfolds into a battle for land, truth, and a family forged in courage. Will Martha reclaim her home and open her heart, or will the desert's shadows claim them all? Subscribe now to follow their journey and share where you're listening from. Every lantern-lit tale needs a listener. Curious how a single night reshapes a lifetime? Stay until the final star fades. The Arizona sun bled copper across the jagged teeth of the Red Mountains, its dying light clawing at the parched earth. Dust hung in the air, stirred by a restless wind that carried the faint tang of sage and the promise of rain that never came. Martha Keene stood on the sagging porch of her ranch, hands rough as the oak planks beneath her boots. Her gray eyes, sharp as flint, scanned the horizon, not out of fear, but habit. Fear had burned out of her long ago, like a fire left untended. The ranch, a patchwork of weathered wood and stubborn hope, creaked in the cooling dusk, whispering of better days now buried with her husband and son. 3 years had passed since a land dispute carved her husband's name into a pine coffin. 2 since fever stole her boy, his small body too frail for the desert's cruelty. She'd buried them both under the lone cottonwood out back, where the earth drank their absence and gave nothing in return. Now, at 34, Martha was a woman forged by loss, her hands calloused from mending fences, her heart a locked gate. A rifle leaned against the doorframe, its barrel catching the last glint of sunlight. She didn't touch it often, but its weight was a comfort, like the shadow of a friend who'd never leave. She turned to step inside, her faded skirt brushing the porch, when a sound stopped her cold. A knock, steady, deliberate, not the timid rap of a peddler or the brash thud of trouble, just the kind of knock that knew how to wait. Martha's hand hovered near the rifle stock, her pulse a quiet drumbeat. She swung the door open, eyes narrowing against the dust. A man stood there, hat in hand, boots scuffed by trails that stretched far beyond her land. He was late 30s maybe, with a jaw square beneath stubble and shoulders wide from labor, not pride. His coat carried the faint grit of a long ride, and his voice, when he spoke, was low, like gravel settling in a dry creek bed. "Heard you needed a rancher, ma'am," he said. "Name's Elias Ward. Just looking for a roof tonight." Martha's gaze didn't soften, but it shifted, past him, to the small figure half hidden in his shadow. A girl, no more than 10, clutched a worn teddy bear, its stitching frayed like an old wound. Her cheeks were smudged with trail dust, her single braid slipping from a faded bonnet. Clara, he called her, when he noticed Martha's stare. The girl's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a cautious awe, like a deer stepping into open ground. She held the bear tight, its one-button eye glinting in the fading light, and her expression asked permission to hope. Martha didn't answer right away. Her instincts, honed by years of solitude, screamed to slam the door, to keep the world at arm's length. Strangers brought trouble, debts unpaid, promises broken, or worse, memories that cut deeper than knives. But Clara's eyes held her, soft and searching, like a mirror to the child she'd lost. Martha's fingers eased from the rifle. "Barn's full of tools and feet," she said finally, her voice steady but not warm. "Spare rooms inside. One night." Elias tipped his hat, a small gesture that carried no pretense. "Obliged, ma'am." Clara stepped forward, her small boots scuffing the dirt, and offered a shy nod that felt heavier than words. Martha stepped aside, letting them pass. The house smelled of pine and dust, its walls worn smooth by years of hard living. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the floor. She pointed to a narrow hall. "Rooms that way. Supper's venison stew, if you're hungry." They sat at the table, a scarred slab of oak that had seen too many empty chairs. Elias ate quietly, glancing at Clara to ensure she took a spoonful. The girl folded her hands in her lap when not eating, her bear propped beside her plate. Martha watched them, her own spoon moving slowly, tasting nothing. The silence wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either, just the kind that comes when three souls measure each other across a divide. Clara broke it first, her voice small but clear. "Do you have horses, ma'am?" Martha paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Two. Old, but they know the land." Clara's lips curved, not quite a smile, but enough to shift the air. "I like horses," she said, and looked to Elias for permission to say more. He gave a small nod. Martha's chest tightened, a knot loosening she hadn't known was there. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a grave. As night fell, the wind outside picked up, rattling the mesquite branches. Martha showed them to the spare room, a small space with a cedar chest and a bed that smelled of dust and forgotten kin. "Water's in the pitcher," she said, turning to leave. Elias stood in the doorway, his silhouette filling the frame. "We'll be gone by dawn, if you say so." Martha paused, one hand on the wall. "We'll see come morning." The door clicked shut, and she stood alone in the hall, the faint sound of Clara's breathing slipping through the cracks. For the first time in too long, the quiet didn't feel like a weight. The Arizona dawn broke slow and gold, painting the red mountains in hues of fire and rust. Martha Keene rose before the rooster, her boots scuffing the warped floorboards as she lit the stove. The house, still heavy with the scent of last night's venison stew, carried a new weight, the soft breathing of strangers under her roof. She stepped outside, the air sharp with the desert's early bite, and checked the chicken coop. A hen pecked at her shadow, defiant as ever, while the milk cow lowed, impatient for grain. The ranch was a living thing, stubborn and worn, much like herself, clinging to a life carved from dust and loss. Elias Ward emerged from the spare room as the first rays sliced through the kitchen window, his hair damp from the basin, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He moved like the land itself, steady, unpolished, shaped by years of wind and work. "Figured you might need a hand with the animals," he said, his voice low, not asking for permission but offering it. Martha didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked to the barn, where a crooked gate sagged like a broken promise. She handed him a bucket, pointing west. "Stall on the left needs cleanin'. Shovel's in the corner. Don't rush the cow. She kicks when she's sour." Elias nodded, no wasted words, and headed out, his boots kicking up small clouds of red dirt. Martha watched through the window, her hands pausing over the dough she kneaded. The sight of a man hauling hay before the sun fully rose wasn't new, but it stirred something she couldn't name, a tightness in her chest, like a rope pulled taut after years of slack. She turned back to the counter, flour dusting her knuckles, when small footsteps pattered behind her. Clara stood in the doorway, her braid askew, clutching her teddy bear like a shield. Her eyes, wide and curious, traced the room as if mapping a new world. "You eat?" Martha asked, raising an eyebrow. Clara nodded, slipping into a chair, her bear propped beside her. She didn't touch the biscuit. Martha slid across the table, her fingers tracing the bear's frayed ear instead. "Papa says we ought to say thanks first," she said, voice soft as a desert breeze. Martha stilled, her hand tightening around her coffee mug. The words hit like a memory of her boy, who'd once bowed his head over porridge with the same quiet grace. "That's fine by me," she said, her tone even, but her eyes lingered on Clara's small hands. The girl bowed her head, whispering a prayer too soft to catch, though Martha heard her own name woven into it, fleeting as a sparrow's shadow. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't press or pull, just settled like dust after a windstorm. Outside, Elias's hammer rang against a fence post, each strike steady as a heartbeat. Clara glanced toward the sound, then back at Martha. "Can I help with the chickens, ma'am?" she asked, her voice bolder now, testing the air. Martha hesitated, her instinct to keep the world at arm's length warring with the girl's earnest gaze. "They're fussy," she said finally. "Don't like strangers." Clara's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I'm good with fussy things. I take care of Papa." Martha's mouth quirked, the closest she'd come to a grin in years. "All right. Buckets by the door. Stay clear of the rooster. He's meaner than a rattlesnake." Clara scampered outside, her small frame darting toward the coop with a purpose that belied her size. Martha followed, leaning against the porch rail, watching as the girl scattered grain with careful handfuls. A hen clucked, indignant, and Clara giggled, a sound sharp and bright, cutting through the ranch's quiet like a blade through burlap. Elias paused by the fence, wiping sweat from his brow, and caught Martha's eye. He didn't smile, just nodded, as if they shared a language forged in the morning's work. By mid-morning, Elias had wrestled the gate back into shape, its hinges groaning less under his hands. Clara, now dusted with dirt and feathers, carried a cracked egg to Martha, presenting it like a prize. "It's broken, but it's still good, right?" she asked, her eyes searching for approval. Martha took the egg, her fingers brushing Clara's. "Good enough," she said, and the words carried more weight than she meant. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth, and Martha felt the ranch stir under their hands. The barn's shadow stretched long, the horses snorted softly, and for a moment, the place didn't feel like it was falling apart. Elias returned, his shirt damp with sweat, and leaned against the barn door. "Gate's solid. Anything else before we move on?" Martha's chest tightened at the thought of them leaving, the quiet returning like a thief. She glanced at Clara, who was coaxing a hen with a soft hum. "Water pump's been sticking," she said, "if you've got time." Elias's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "Got time," he said, and turned to the pump. Clara looked up, her bear tucked under one arm, and offered Martha a shy grin. The wind kicked up, carrying the scent of sage and the faint promise of something new. Martha didn't name it, didn't dare. But as she watched Clara's small hands scatter grain, she felt the ranch breathe again, like a heart remembering how to beat. The midday sun scorched the Arizona earth, turning the red dirt to a shimmering haze that blurred the edges of the red mountains. Martha Keene stood in the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands, the faint hum of Clara's voice outside mingling with the cluck of hens. The ranch felt alive today, stirred by the small hands, scattering grain, and the steady rhythm of Elias's work. Yet, as Martha glanced out the window, a shadow lingered in her chest. Not fear, but the ghost of a life she'd buried. The promise of something new hung fragile as a spider's web stretched across a canyon. She turned to the parlor, seeking a moment's quiet, and her eyes fell on the old wooden chest in the corner. It had been her husband's, carved from cedar, its lid scarred by years of hard use. She hadn't opened it since his death, hadn't dared stir the memories locked inside. But today, with the ranch breathing under strangers' hands, she knelt before it, her fingers tracing the grain. The hinges groaned as she lifted the lid, revealing a tangle of his things, leather gloves worn thin, a rusted spur, a folded shirt still carrying the faint scent of tobacco and sweat. Beneath it all, a loose floorboard caught her eye, warped just enough to hint at a secret. Martha pried it up, the wood splintering under her calloused fingers. A small hollow gaped beneath, cradling a bundle of papers tied with twine, their edges yellowed and curled like dry leaves. Her breath caught, sharp as a thorn. She untied the bundle, unfolding the first sheet. A map, its ink faded but precise, charting underground water veins that snaked beneath her land. Scrawled in her husband's hand was a warning. Union Pacific wants the water. Refused their offer. They won't stop. The next paper bore a notary's seal, a deed rejecting the company's claim. Her heart thudded, the truth hitting like a hoof to the chest. His death wasn't a stray bullet in a land dispute. It was a reckoning. She read on, each letter a knife carving deeper. Friends, neighbors, men long gone had written to him, their words urgent. They burned Carter's well. They bought the sheriff in Tucson, pack Martha and ride. The Union Pacific Land Company, a shadow stretching from railroad barrens to desert ranches, had hunted him for saying no. He'd kept it from her, shielded her from the storm, and paid with his life. The papers trembled in her hands, rage and betrayal warring in her gut. Why hadn't he trusted her with the truth? The floorboards creaked behind her. Elias stood in the doorway, his hat tipped back, sweat beading on his brow from fixing the pump. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice steady but searching. Martha's grip tightened on the papers, her eyes blazing. "Found these," she said, thrusting the bundle toward him. "My husband didn't die for nothing. They killed him." Elias knelt beside her, scanning the map, his jaw tightening as he read the warnings. "Union Pacific," he muttered, the name like poison on his tongue. "I know their kind." Martha's gaze sharpened. "How?" Elias hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of the map. "Used to ride for them," he said, his voice low, as a confession dragged from the dirt. "Hired gun, years back. Broke men's wills for their coin. Quit when my wife died. Couldn't stomach their blood money no more." Martha's breath hissed out, her hands clenching. "You worked for the men who took my husband." She stood, the papers falling to the floor, her voice cold as iron. "Get out." Elias didn't move, his eyes meeting hers, unflinching. "I ain't them anymore, Martha. I came here to start clean for Clara. I know their tricks, how they forge deeds, twist knives in the dark. Let me help you fight 'em." Clara's small figure appeared in the doorway, her teddy bear dangling from one hand, eyes wide with worry. "Ma'am?" she whispered, stepping closer. Martha's anger faltered, caught in the girl's gaze, soft as a desert bloom. She wanted to scream, to shut them out. But Clara's presence was a tether, pulling her back from the edge. She sank to her knees, gathering the papers. "Why'd he hide this?" she murmured, more to herself than Elias. "Thought he was protecting you," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. "Thought silence would keep you safe. It didn't." Martha looked at the map, the lines of water her husband had died to protect. "They'll come for this," she said, her voice hardening. "For the land, the water, all of it." Elias nodded, his hand resting near hers, not touching but close. "Then we face him, together." Clara stepped forward, her small hand brushing Martha's arm. "We're staying, right?" she asked, her voice trembling but hopeful. Martha looked into her eyes, seeing her own boy's ghost, and something shifted, a spark of resolve. "For now," she said, her voice steady as the earth beneath them. Outside, the wind howled, kicking up dust that danced like specters across the yard. The ranch was no longer just hers to hold. was hers to fight for. The Arizona afternoon hung heavy, the sky bruised purple over the red mountains, as if the land itself sensed a fight brewing. Martha Keene stood by the well, her hands gripping a bucket, the weight of her husband's hidden papers still pressing on her mind. The ranch, once a silent witness to her grief, now hummed with purpose. Clara's soft chatter with the hens, Elias's steady hammer fixing the pump. Yet the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning splits a cottonwood. The wind stirred, sharp and mean, kicking up red dust that stung her eyes and coated her throat. She squinted toward the horizon, where clouds stacked like cattle along a dry ridge. A low groan came from the cattle pen, its patchwork roof of timber and tin shuddering under the gathering gusts. A loose sheet of metal flapped, clawing at its nails, threatening to tear free and slice through the yard like a scythe. "Roof's gonna give," Martha muttered, already moving, her boots crunching gravel. Elias emerged from the barn, rope coiled over his shoulder, hammer in hand, reading her face without a word. "We'd best get up there before it flies," he said, his voice steady as stone. Martha nodded, grabbing the ladder from the barn's sidewall, her pulse quickening as the wind howled louder, like coyotes arguing with the sky. They propped the ladder against the pen's slanted side, the metal rungs cold under her hands. "I'll take the left," Martha called, climbing fast, her braid slapping her neck as she reached the roof. "I built this with John. I know which boards hate me most." Elias gave a short nod, climbing beside her, his boots scraping the wood. The metal sheet stung their fingers, chilled by the coming storm. Every nail Elias drove echoed like a distant gunshot, sharp and final. Martha knelt at a buckled corner, steadying the tin with one hand, hammering with the other, her focus narrowing to the rhythm of the task. Then the wind surged, a feral roar that tore at her coat like a living thing. A rotten plank beneath her splintered, giving way without warning. She pitched sideways, the sky spinning, her breath snagged in her throat. The ladder rattled below, too far to reach. For a split second, the world was nothing but dust and vertigo. Then a hand clamped her wrist, strong as iron. "Gotcha," Elias growled, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade. He'd lunged, one knee braced on a rafter, his free hand gripping a beam for balance. His eyes locked on hers, fierce and unyielding, as if the sky could fall, and he'd still hold on. Martha's heart pounded, her boots scraping the roof's edge as he hauled her up, muscles straining under his weathered coat. They collapsed side by side, gasping, the wind screaming above them. Sparse raindrops fell, sharp as needles, stinging her face. She stared at the roiling clouds, her chest heaving, not from the climb, but from the flood of memory. John's voice, promising he'd be back before the last storm hit. He never came. Elias didn't speak, didn't ask, just got to his feet and offered his hand again. She took it, her fingers trembling, and they finished the roof in silence, nails biting wood as the storm raged on. Below, Clara stood frozen in the yard, her teddy bear clutched tight, eyes wide with fear. "Ma'am," she cried, running to Martha as they climbed down, soaked and battered. The girl flung her arms around Martha's waist, her small body shaking. "Thought the storm took you," she whispered. Martha knelt, pulling Clara close, her own heart lurching at the weight of those words. "Not today," she said, her voice rough but steady, the desert's grit in every syllable. As the rain eased, the three stood under the dripping eaves, the ranch battered, but holding. Martha looked at Elias, his face smeared with dirt, and felt a shift, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. If this story of grit and heart stirs something in you, subscribe to keep these tales alive and share where you're listening from. We're all part of this rugged land story. Elias wiped his brow, his eyes meeting hers. Roof solid, he said. What's next? Martha glanced at the papers hidden inside, their truth heavier than the storm. Trouble's comin', she said, her voice low. We need to be ready. The wind died to a whisper, but the air still crackled, electric with the promise of a fight. Martha straightened, Clara's hand in hers, and felt the ranch brace itself, like a horse sensing the spur. The papers had named their enemy, and the storm had forged their resolve. They weren't just holding ground, they were drawing a line in the dust. The Arizona morning broke still and sharp, the red mountains standing sentinel under a sky too clear for comfort. Martha Keene stepped onto the porch, her boots scuffing the worn boards, the weight of the coming fight settling like dust in her bones. The ranch stood firm after the storm, its patched roof glinting under the rising sun. But the air carried a warning, a quiet that felt like the pause before a rattlesnake strikes. Clara's soft hum drifted from the chicken coop, and Elias's silhouette moved near the barn, checking the horse's tack. They were readying for a battle not yet named, but Martha felt its shadow creeping closer. She tightened her shawl against the morning's chill, her mind on the papers hidden beneath the parlor floor. The Union Pacific Land Company's name burned in her thoughts, a brand on her husband's memory. She was about to call Elias when the sound came, hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, cutting through the desert's hush. A rider approached, tall in the saddle, his brown coat too clean for ranch work, boots polished to a mocking shine. His horse snorted, restless, as if it sensed the trouble its master brought. Martha's hand drifted to the rifle leaning by the door, her pulse steady but alert. The man dismounted with a smoothness that spoke of confidence, not kindness, and strode up the path like he owned the earth beneath it. "Morning, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Name's Silas Cross. I believe we have business." Elias crossed the yard, his hand resting near the knife on his belt, casual but ready. Clara paused by the coop, her teddy bear dangling from one hand, her eyes narrowing as she watched the stranger. Martha didn't move, her voice flat as the desert floor. "What kind of business?" Silas pulled a folded paper from his coat, its edges crisp, unnatural for a land where everything frayed. "Your late husband left a debt. Gambling, from the Green Table Club in Santa Cruz. This writ, notarized, entitles the creditor to seize this ranch to settle it." He held it out, his smile sharpening. Martha didn't take it, her eyes like flint. "John didn't gamble," she said, each word a stone dropped in still water. Silas raised a brow, his voice smooth as snake oil. "The books say otherwise, ma'am." Elias stepped forward, his boots grinding gravel. "You always ride alone to collect dead men's debts?" His voice was low, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Silas's gaze flicked to him, sizing him up. "And you must be the hired help. This doesn't concern you." Elias didn't blink. "I'm the man standing between you and the gate. Choose your words careful." The air thickened, the silence taut as a bowstring. Clara edged closer to Martha, her small hand brushing the hem of her skirt, seeking anchor. Silas chuckled, a sound dry as mesquite, and tucked the paper back into his coat. "No need for tempers. I'm here as a courtesy. You've got 3 days to clear out, or we take what's owed." Martha's hands clenched, her nails biting her palms. "That paper's a lie, and you know it," she said, her voice cold as a winter creek. Silas clicked his tongue, his eyes glinting with menace. "The folks I represent don't take kindly to delays. This ranch, this water, it's worth more than you understand." Elias's jaw tightened, his hand still near his knife. "I know your kind, Cross. Union Pacific doesn't send men like you for courtesy. They send you to break folks." Silas's smile faltered, just for a moment, before he turned, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. 3 days, he called, dust trailing behind him like a warning shot. Martha watched him disappear, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a fire kindled by the paper's truth. "He's one of them," she said, her voice low. "The ones who took John." Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "That writ's forged. Seen their handiwork before. Same notary seal they used to cheat widows in Tucson." Clara looked up, her voice small but steady. "Are they going to take our home, ma'am?" Martha knelt, meeting her eyes, the girl's fear mirroring her own long-buried grief. "Not if I can help it," she said, her hand brushing Clara's cheek, firm but gentle. "We're riding to town. There's a man there who can fight paper with paper." The sun climbed higher, baking the earth, but the ranch felt colder now, its edges sharpened by threat. Martha gathered the hidden papers, tucking them into a leather pouch, her husband's initials carved into its flap. Elias saddled the horses, his movements swift but calm, while Clara clung to her bear, watching them both. The wind stirred, whispering of battles yet to come, but Martha stood taller, her resolve hard as the red rock around them. They would ride at dawn, not to run, but to face the shadow, head on. The Arizona dawn burned copper across the horizon, the red mountains casting long shadows over the trail to town. Martha Keene rode with her husband's leather pouch slung across her chest, the hidden papers within a weight heavier than stone. Elias Ward led the way, his hat low, eyes scanning the scrub and rock for threats unspoken. Clara, tucked close behind Martha, clutched her teddy bear, her small frame swaying with the horse's gait. The decision to ride at first light had set their course, not fleeing, but charging toward truth, with the Union Pacific Land Company's shadow looming like a vulture over Carrion. The trail wound through a narrow pass, where mesquite and boulder crowded close, the air thick with the scent of dust and sage. The horses' hooves clopped steadily, but the silence was wrong. Too still. The birds hushed, the wind holding its breath. Martha's grip tightened on the reins, her rifle slung across her saddle, its cold steel a reminder of the stakes. Elias raised a hand, pulling his mount to a stop, his nose twitching. "Smoke," he said, low and sharp. "Wrong kind." Before Martha could respond, a crack split the air, a rifle shot, kicking up dirt inches from her horse's hooves. "Down!" Elias shouted, rolling off his mount, his colt drawn in a single motion. Martha yanked Clara behind a jagged outcrop, her heart hammering as another shot whined past, splintering a mesquite branch. Clara whimpered, her bear pressed tight to her chest, eyes wide with terror. Dust choked the air, the smoke acrid, curling from the rocks above. Elias crouched low, firing back, his shots precise, echoing off the canyon walls. "3 of 'em," he called, voice calm but taut. "Rifles, poor aim, smart cover, flanking left." Martha's breath came in gasps, her hand steadying Clara as she scanned the ridge. Shadows moved, men, not ghosts, their hats low, rifles glinting in the morning light. Elias dropped one with a clean shot, a scream tearing through the pass as the man clutched his shoulder and fell. Martha's mind raced, the papers in her pouch a burning weight. This wasn't chance. They'd been hunted. Another bullet grazed the outcrop, spitting gravel. Clara cried out, her voice small but piercing. "Ma'am, they're gonna get us!" Before Martha could answer, a shadow broke through the brush on their right. A rider, charging hard, revolver raised, his eyes locked on Clara. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the glint of his barrel, the girl's trembling form. Martha didn't think. She grabbed the rifle from her saddle, its weight familiar as a long-forgotten friend. Her hands moved on instinct, the stock firm against her shoulder, her finger squeezing the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder, the rider tumbling from his horse, hitting the dirt with a thud and a curse. Blood bloomed on his sleeve, his revolver skittering across the rocks. Silence fell, heavy as a fallen tree. Elias fired once more, and the third gunman broke cover, crashing through the scrub like a spooked steer, his horse bolting into the distance. Martha stood frozen, the rifle smoking in her hands, her chest heaving. She hadn't fired a gun since John's death, hadn't wanted to feel its kick again. Clara stared at her, eyes wet and wide, then flung herself into Martha's arms, sobbing. "Mama," she whispered, the word muffled against Martha's coat. It hit harder than the bullet's echo, cracking something deep within her, a wall she'd built to keep the world out. Martha dropped the rifle, kneeling to pull Clara close, her hands shaking as she buried her face in the girl's hair. The scent of dust and fear clung to them both, but the embrace was steady, grounding. Elias approached, his Colt still drawn but lowered, his face smeared with smoke and grit. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough but warm, his eyes searching hers. Martha nodded, her throat too tight for words. "We're okay," she managed, her hand still cradling Clara's head. He crouched beside them, his hand resting lightly on Martha's shoulder, a touch neither possessive nor fleeting, just there, like the land itself. Shell casings glinted in the dirt, the horses snorted nervously, but the pass was quiet now, the threat scattered like ash on the wind. Martha looked at Elias, his steady gaze anchoring her. "They knew we were coming," she said, her voice low, the paper's weight pressing harder now. "They're scared of what's in that pouch." Elias nodded, holstering his Colt. "Means we're close to something they don't want found." He stood, offering a hand to help her up. Clara clung to Martha's side, her bare dangling, one button eye catching the sun. The trail stretched ahead, dust settling in their wake, but the fight had only begun. Martha rose, her resolve hard as the canyon rock, ready to face the town and the truth waiting there. The Arizona sun blazed high, its heat pressing down on the dusty trail as Martha Keene, Elias Ward, and Clara rode into Clifton, their horses lathered and weary from the ambush's aftermath. The town loomed ahead, a scatter of clapboard buildings, baking under a sky wide as judgment. Martha's hand rested on the leather pouch at her side, her husband's papers, a silent vow to finish what he started. The memory of Clara's trembling voice calling her "Mama" burned in her chest, fueling her resolve. They weren't just riding for justice, they were riding to claim their ground. Clifton buzzed with whispers, the ambush's echo already rippling through the streets. Dust clouds and gunfire reports had reached the townsfolk, carried by a passing trader who'd seen the fight from a ridge. Martha dismounted outside the town hall, her legs aching but her spine straight as a fence post. Elias tied the horses, his eyes scanning the crowd for threats, while Clara clung to Martha's hand, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. The hall's steps creaked under their boots, and there stood Jonas Hale, the retired lawyer, his gold-rimmed spectacles glinting like a warning. "Got your message," he said, papers in hand, his voice dry as sagebrush. "You've stirred a hornet's nest." Inside, the hall was a cauldron of murmurs, packed with miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers, faces Martha knew but had never leaned on. Some nodded as she passed, their eyes hard with shared defiance. Others stood silent, their presence a quiet oath. At the front, Silas Cross stood flanked by two men in fine vests, their smiles as smug as fresh-painted signs. One held a forged deed like a trophy, its notary seal gleaming with false authority. Mayor Trumbull, a wiry man with a mustache like barbed wire, pounded a gavel, calling order. "What's this ruckus about?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the crowd's hum. Jonas stepped forward, his papers raised like a drawn blade. These prove the Keene ranch was paid in full by John Keene, witnessed and notarized, he said, his tone sharp as a spur. And these letters, found in the Keene estate, name the Union Pacific Land Company in a campaign of threats and murder. He unfolded a letter, reading aloud. "They burned Carter's well. They'll come for you next." The crowd stirred, a low growl rising. Silas scoffed, his voice smooth as snake oil. "Hearsay and desperation. The law honors debts, and that ranch is owed." "The law honors truth," Jonas snapped, his spectacles flashing. "And this town's tired of your kind stealing what's ours." He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. "How many of you got letters, threats, or promises to sell your land cheap?" A hand rose. Old man Barrow from the feed store, his face creased with anger. Then Miss Emery, the schoolteacher, had her chin high. More followed, a forest of hands, each one a story of coercion. Martha's heart thudded, the room's heat pressing against her skin, but she stood taller, the pouch's weight grounding her. Elias stepped up, his voice low but steady, like a river carving stone. "I rode for Union Pacific once. Saw their forgeries, their hired guns. That deed's a lie, same as the ones they used to break folks in Tucson." Silas's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching toward his coat. "You're a turncoat then," he sneered. "Your word's worth less than dust." Elias didn't flinch. "I know your tricks, Cross, and I know the men you pay to pull triggers." The crowd's murmur grew to a roar, boots stomping like distant thunder. Silas's hand darted for his revolver, a flash of steel in the lamplight. Elias moved faster, pinning his wrist to the table, the gun clattering to the floor. The crowd surged, ranchers and miners closing in, their faces hard as the desert rock. "Enough!" Trumbull bellowed, his gavel cracking like a whip. "Mr. Cross, you and your men have 10 minutes to leave Clifton. Try your tricks again, and it won't be a courtroom you face, it'll be us." Silas paled, his allies shrinking back as the hall erupted, chairs scraping, voices rising in a unified tide. The syndicate men slipped out, dust trailing their retreat like a coward's shadow. Jonas turned to Martha, his half-smile weary but firm. "You held your ground. Now the town's holding it with you." Martha clutched the pouch, her husband's truth vindicated, but the weight of Clara's hand in hers felt heavier. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the town in firelight. The fight was won, but the ranch waited. A home not yet fully claimed, its future as uncertain as a desert spring. The Arizona dusk settled over Clifton like a heavy quilt, the red mountains fading into shadows as the town's firelight flickered against the cooling air. Martha Keene rode back to her ranch, the leather pouch now lighter with the town's seal pressed into her deed, a hard-won victory etched in ink and resolve. Elias Ward rode beside her, his silhouette steady under the wide sky, while Clara, nestled close, clutched her teddy bear, her quiet humming a soft thread weaving them together. The courtroom's triumph lingered, but the ranch waited ahead, its weathered boards and stubborn earth calling them home with a promise yet to be fulfilled. Night fell gently, the desert's hush broken only by the rustle of mesquite and the distant call of a coyote. Martha stepped into the kitchen, the air thick with the scent of flour and sage, her hands moving to wipe down the counter. Clara trailed behind, folding tea towels with careful precision, her small fingers working as they belonged to the house. Elias lingered outside, checking the corral gate, his shadow long and sure in the moonlight. The ranch felt different now, not just a place to survive, but a ground to stand on, its cracks filled with something new. A soft knock broke the quiet, not heavy, just enough to turn Martha's head. Elias opened the door, his brow furrowing, as Mrs. Emery, the schoolteacher, stood there, a bundle of wildflowers in one hand, a lantern glowing warmly in the other. "For the fight," she said, her voice soft as the dusk, nodding to Martha. Before Martha could respond, more came. Old man Barrow from the feed store, his hands gnarled as oak. 2 ranch hands from downriver, their hats dusty. The widow cook, her apron still dusted with mesa flour. Each carried a lantern, their glass globes casting pools of light that danced across the yard. No one spoke much. No one needed to. They fanned out, hanging lanterns on fence posts, porch rails, and the corral's crooked gate. Each flame flickered to life, a quiet vow etched in gold against the dark. Martha stood on the porch, her arms folded, watching as the townsfolk worked in silence, their boots scuffing the red dirt. Clara slipped beside her, her bear tucked under one arm, eyes wide with wonder. "It's like stars on the ground," she whispered, and Martha's chest tightened, the weight of the girl's words heavier than the deed in her pouch. As the last neighbor left, the ranch glowed like a beacon, its rough edges softened by the lantern light. Martha moved inside, the fire in the hearth crackling low, casting shadows that no longer felt empty. Clara sat cross-legged on her bed, a small leather journal, a gift from Elias, open in her lap. She scratched a pencil across the page, her tongue peeking out in concentration. "Some houses are built with nails," she wrote, "others with hearts." She underlined it, then closed the book, content, her small frame curled under a shawl Martha had draped over her. Elias joined Martha on the porch, leaning on the railing, his eyes tracing the horizon where the last light bled into the hills. The air smelled of dust and sage, the night's chill settling like a promise. "Didn't come here just to fix fences," he said, his voice low, steady as the earth. "Came to stay, if you'll have me." Martha turned to him, her gaze steady, studying the scar on his jaw, the hands that had mended her gait, the man who'd stood between her and danger. She didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch like the desert itself. "Supper's at 6, she said finally, her voice soft but sure, the hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Elias let out a breath, maybe laughter, maybe relief, his shoulders easing. They stood there, the lantern's glow washing over them, the ranch alive with light and purpose. Clara slipped out, her journal tucked away, and leaned into Martha's side, her eyes heavy with sleep. Martha's hand rested on the girl's shoulder, Elias's arm brushing hers, and the three of them stood together, their shadows blending into one. The night deepened, the lanterns burning steadily, each flame a testament to the town's stand, to a family forged not by blood, but by choice. The ranch wasn't just Martha's anymore. It was theirs, its earth marked by their sweat, its walls warmed by their presence. Far off, a coyote's howl wove through the dark, no longer a threat, but a lullaby. The red mountains loomed silent, watching over a home reborn, its heart beating strong under a sky stitched with stars. The lanterns of Martha's ranch burned bright, a testament to resilience and chosen family under Arizona's vast sky. What did this tale of grit and heart stir in you? Share your thoughts. Where did this story take you? And what does home mean to you? Your voices keep these desert fires alive. I'm grateful for every moment you've spent riding this trail with us, through dust and triumph. Until the next tale calls from beyond the ridge, where truth and courage ride tall, stay close to the light. We'll meet again under the stars,